Hey guys, today I want to look at getting a nice animated focus pull between objects in our scene within Cinema 4D. We'll have a play with some depth of field, use some simple keyframe animation to pull off this technique. Make sure to hit that like button if you find this tip helpful, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos. Cheers guys.
Join the Dove Shack.
Alright, what are we looking at today? I wanted to dive in and animate our focus, get some nice pull focus happening within our scene. And we're going to be doing this all within Cinema 4D. We're not going to be using any depth passes, we're going to be using the inbuilt depth of field within Cinema. We're going to start animating it and get some really nice, almost handheld camera focal pulls. So let's have a look at this little scene I've got set up here. I've been really getting into some character animation stuff, trying to push it a bit further. I guess dive in and trying to figure out ways to make it a little bit less daunting. So let's have a look at this little scene. We've got this little sausage guy, almost sausage party-esque, and then a couple of his mates pop up from behind him. Now I think you guys really like some character stuff. I've got a Pixar mouth tutorial where I dive in and start playing with some of the sculpting tools to try and get a Pixar-esque style look, and that's sort of something what I've tried to go on for here, almost that sausage party sort of vibe. So if I jump out of my camera, we'll spin around this scene and have a look at what we've got here. It's not very complex. I've just used a capsule, thrown a sculpting tag onto it, and just started playing around and just started moving around these polygons. You can see when I hit MB to reveal our mesh, I'm not really using a very high mesh, just enough for us to start diving in and get some of these smooth edges. All right, so what do we want to do? So I've got character 1, character 2, and character 3. Let me just show you what we've got here. If I turn off our jiggle for a second within our character 2, you can see we've just got 2 keyframes between frame 10 and frame 20. And all that's doing is rotating our guy from behind our main guy. So if I scrub through there, you can see we just get that real simple movement of him popping out. Now by applying a jiggle tag to our little character here, I've used 100% strength, but not a heap of stiffness and just a little bit of drag. And what that's allowing us to do is to get some nice fluid movement. Now let's have a look at our third character. I wanted him to be a little bit snappier. So you can see I've used a really high stiffness and about a medium drag strength. You can see he now just pops in from behind there. What I'm wanting to try and achieve is for our main guy in the foreground to be nice and focused. And then when our second character comes in, I want our camera to focal pull to him. I want to get some nice organic movement within the camera pull, almost as if it's handheld. And then we're going to go from this second guy into our third character. So the first two will start getting a little bit softer in focus as that third guy becomes our main subject. All right, let's have a crack at putting this together. Now, I've already got my camera set up in my frame. You can see I'm using quite a low focal length, something really wide. And the reason I'm doing this, you can see let's make a copy of this camera. We'll jump in that, and let's make this something big. Let's give it about a 200 focal length. Let me zoom out so our guy's in shot here. And you can see what it's doing. It just starts flattening out our images, and we don't get a heap of perspective between those characters. Now this is actually kind of a cool look. By using a bigger focal length, we're not getting a heap of depth within our characters. So you can see they almost look all the same size, even though they are further apart within Z space. All right, let's delete that camera. We'll return back to our main camera set. And this is why we're using that 24 millimeter focal length. So you can see our characters, we start to feel that perspective as they pop up from behind our main guy. All right, so what do we want to do? I'm thinking we'll either use the eyes as our main focal spot. Now, let's drop a sphere into our scene. And I'm just going to give this 5 segments, something really nice and small. Jump into our 4 views and see where this has ended up for us. Let's shrink it down a little bit. I'm just hitting S while in these different views, and that's going to snap it into frame. Be sure not to do it in your main perspective view. We might actually go and add a protection tag to our camera, so that way if we do move within our view, we won't affect our camera. Now all I'm doing here is I'm just going to reposition our sphere that we've added into our scene, shrinking it down. And what I'm aiming for here, I'm just trying to get this about the center of the eyes. You can see by using these 4 views, we're able to really quickly pinpoint that spot. To make this even easier, let's just turn off our second and third characters. So we've just got our main character for the moment. I'm actually going to hit NA in all our windows And it'll get rid of that wireframe look and make it a bit easier to identify our character here. Alright, I'm pretty happy with that spot. I'm pretty happy with where we've got this circle, and we could do this with a null, but the reason I'm going to use a circle is so we can track that movement and get a really good representation of how the camera is solving for that focus pull. Let's jump into our perspective view for a second. And I'm just going to turn off our bottom traffic light on our sphere, and what that's going to do is allow it to not render. As I click render now, you're going to see we don't actually see that sphere. So let's go into our camera, and you can see we've got this focus object. We're going to grab our sphere and drop it into that focus object. And we'll jump over into our physical, and we've got our f-stop, and the f-stop, just like a camera, is where we're going to get that nice depth of field, that nice blurry background, and really sharp focus on our target. Let's just go into our physical render settings for a second and make sure we've got depth of field ticked on. I've got this set at 2 for the moment. Let's have a quick look at that. You are going to notice you're going to take a render hit when using the depth of field within Cinema 4D, but personally I think it looks a little bit better than outputting a depth pass and doing it that way. Now, because we're just using our character at the moment, we're not being able to really see, we're not really seeing if we're getting a heap of depth against the white background. So what I'm going to do, I'll drop it down to 0.5, and let's just have another look at that for the moment. As I look at this, our character's starting to look a little bit softer on the edges. It looks like we are getting some nice fall off of that focus. I'm going to turn back on our second character and scrub forward in our timeline until he's in shot. Now you can see our sphere is still in the middle of our main character's eyes, and that's where our focus is. Let's hit render and see if we get some nice fall off to that second guy. Now I'm just using some medium render settings here, guys, to get some nice fast results for you. We'll jack this up right at the end and get rid of all that fuzziness. Now I've just picked up myself a nice 24mm lens, and it goes all the way down to an f-stop of 1.4, which allows for some really beautiful depth of field. So the inbuilt camera system can get a little bit confusing when you're trying to compare it to the real life camera, and it all comes down to scale. So the reason we're needing to use such a low f-stop compared to what would actually be practical in the real life world, I believe, is because of the scale of our scene and the size of the objects we're working with. Let's have a look at an f-stop at 0.2 and we'll see what that looks like. Okay, this is looking good. We're now, our second guy is starting to really blur out, and our main guy is clearly the focus of this shot. Let's just grab forward a little bit further in our timeline and turn back on our third character. Let's have a look at this. Now he is further than our second guy again, so we should be seeing even more depth. We should be seeing even more blur of that third character. Perfect, our main guy is nice and sharp while those other two are dropping off into the distance. Alright, now what we're going to do is animate our sphere to get this nice pull focus between the three characters. So if we select our second character, we can see by about frame 20 is where he's completely in view. So that's also going to be our target spot for our sphere. Let's come to frame 10, and with our sphere selected, let's just add a keyframe. All that's doing is allowing for that first 10 frames to hold in its position. I'm going to jump into my 4 views for a second, zoom out a bit, and what we now need to do is position our sphere into a target spot on our second character. So let's turn off jiggle for a second and come forward to frame 20, because this is ultimately where our character is going to rest once that jiggle stops taking effect. I'm going to grab our sphere and move it to about the center spot of the eyeballs of that second character. Hitting S to frame it up in our view spots here. Just going to zoom out a little bit. Just grab that and reposition it about center of the eyes there. I'll come forward just a little bit. And on our sphere, let's now add a keyframe. So let's see what's going on now. We can see that sphere now holds for that first 10 frames before snapping to our second character at that 20 frame mark. Let's hit render and let's have a look at what we've got now. Perfect, just like we wanted, our second character is now that main point of focus, while our first character is starting to blur out a little bit. Now the last thing we need to do is reposition our sphere so we're pulling focus on that third character. Let's come forward to frame 70, because this is where we know that third character is going to start its movement into frame. And we'll add a keyframe on our sphere. Let's do the same thing. Let's toggle off the jiggle on our third character for the moment and come forward to frame 80. And this is where we know that's our final frame. This is where our character is going to ultimately rest once that jiggle stops taking effect. Let's grab our sphere again. What we now need to do is reposition this. What we're going to do now is reposition this on our third character. Let's jump back into our perspective view. Let's add a keyframe on our sphere at that point. Let's hit render and have a look at what we've got. Our first character is now looking really blurry. That second character, we're starting to lose a bit of focus on him. And that third character is looking really nice and sharp. Now let's turn back on the jiggle in both of our characters. Now you can see what's happening. That sphere is, we can actually see the path of that sphere moving through the scene, pulling focus. Now what I want to try is, because we've keyframed this sphere and this has been our camera's target as its focus, what we're going to do is add another jiggle to this sphere. Now let's just have a quick look at what happens here. I don't know if you can tell, but we're getting a bit of overshoot on the actual sphere itself. What I might actually do is hide our characters for a second so you can see what this sphere is doing. You can see all we did is set 3 spots for it to ultimately rest. But by using that jiggle effector, we're getting some overshoot back and forth before ultimately resting. And what this is going to do, the camera is going to focus on this sphere and pull focus no matter where it is. So we're going to get that little bit of overshoot and that little bit of blurriness where we want our focus to be. And what this is going to allow is for almost that handheld camera look, as if someone is pulling focus and trying to snap to objects in the scene. All right, I'll render this one out, give you guys a look. Hope that was a bit of fun, something a bit different. If character stuff is something you're into and you want to learn a bit more, and you wouldn't mind, and you want to see me maybe jump into some of the sculpting and modeling side of it, let us know. I'd love to share it with you guys. All right, thanks. See you again soon.